Hey, Nate.
Hello. Sorry to
Sorry, I
bother
just
you
saw
on a holiday.
this. So I'm gonna text Zoe's mom and
Okay.
see if I can get her. And then I think I have Leslie's number, so I can text her, and then I'll disappear and you guys can chat. But I was worried something weird would happen. I didn't think about that part. So I'm gonna disappear and do this.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll work.
My audio, start video. Oops. We did it.
Michael did it.
Michael did it. Thanks, Michael.
Sure. Have a good meeting.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Michael.
You will.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, shall I move to open the meeting?
Yes, please.
Oh, do we need to do minutes?
I'm happy to do minutes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, I hereby move to open the meeting.
Okay. I second it.
Hearing no objections, I will write everybody down as assenting. All right. Just write at the same time. Okay. All right. Well, the block of text that kind of frames what we're responding to is, I think, like all of the different action areas, open to a lot of different angles, so I didn't know if in preparation for this meeting, if you had initial thoughts or reactions, but for an agenda, I had lots of ideas, but I want to make sure there's a good open space for just how to tackle our task, I guess. So
Yeah, I feel like the way I'm thinking about being on this group. The reason why I was interested in it is because I feel like I have some questions about the whole paradigm. And I want to kind of ask those questions throughout the process of determining how to respond to invasive species. And some of those questions start with just like, how are we defining native? And how are we thinking about what a healthy ecosystem is? And kind of coming from a place of wanting to learn more about like the perspective of there are these invasive species that are disturbing the balance, and but also like I don't totally agree yet that that's totally true, and maybe there are some examples in which it is and some examples in which it isn't so much. Like there were some species on the list that I have just personally like worked a lot with and benefited a lot from in my life. And so that's just a little bit of where I'm coming from.
Which species are those, Zoe, that you've worked a lot with and benefited from?
I was thinking of black locust, and the fact that it, well, personally, like all my greenhouse shelving and is all made from black locust, and it's just like this really incredible rot resistant wood. It fixes nitrogen, so it improves the soil, and there's so many of these species that were outlined that they're just really good at growing in disturbed land. And like there was some way when I was reading like the impact section of the HMP, and they have a whole section on like invasive species response to climate change and how that they're really resilient. Like that's how I was reading. I was like, whoa, look at this resiliency. Like don't we want that to an extent? And those are just some questions that were coming up for me. Autumn olive is another one that I eat so much autumn olive, and it's also a nitrogen fixer, and provides really good habitat for there was an article that I also read that I can send by John O'Niger, and it's called Rethinking the Invasive Species Paradigm, and he just points to a lot of kind of almost like just really like fear-based language around it all, that I think he's arguing that it has actually directed the way that it is completely like biased the way that scientists have the studies that they've done. They're kind of coming at them from a perspective of like already assuming harm, and that has skewed some of their results. So yeah. I just want to keep asking those questions throughout this conversation. But I also I didn't watch I watched a little bit of the video that you sent, Nate. So I would say that my knowledge base is biased in the kind of like questioning the invasive species. So yeah. Where are other people standing in that regard?
Well, I'll go next. Where did you want to go, Nate? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would just reacting to what you're saying, Zoe. I also have a lot of questions, and one of the reasons I was interested in this work group is there's a real opportunity for me to learn a lot. It's part of my motivation for being involved in ECAC in the first place. And one thing that's the case is, with rising temperatures, some species, both animal and plant species, are going to move north, and there are species that will backfill from the south, and you could easily understand that as a natural ecosystem response to the unnatural release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from human action. And I think there's it's the case that a lot of change is coming, and there's a role for people to perhaps shape some of that change, but I have a lot of questions about what that looks like, right? So in the MVP report, invasive species presents a low vulnerability, like that's how it's characterized in the report, right? People have a low vulnerability to this change in species regimen. But they're, I think, looking at it from the angle of what does the spread of certain kinds of insect vectors mean for wildfires, which is like a sort of a life and property threat, and then infectious disease, right? So like equine encephalitis or other mosquito-borne diseases. So that framing is really human-centric, and there's like this stewardship question too, right? It's not just about direct human effects, but this really bears on how humans are going to respond to these massive changes, and what's our role, and then what are our responsibilities in this context, beyond like trying to stop emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is in my mind like the first thing.
Yeah, that I think that's a really good angle, and I just what I've witnessed in terms of human response to like invasive species is just the response is so destructive and costly, like financially costly. So I just I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Although I was encouraged by the link that you sent of what they're doing in Westford. It seems like a lot of tree planting was their angle. Yeah, like it was a lot focused on like encouraging things by planting things, rather than like a sweeping clearing of like, how are we going to get rid of these things, which I don't know what Shutesbury's history of using those kinds of tactics is.
Yeah, that would be good to understand. I mean, I had a 45-minute discussion with the forester who signed off on a 3-acre clear cut behind my property. I was successful in moving the cut back so I don't see it, but it took her 15 minutes to say, yeah, it's a clear cut. And then she was like, well, new species will come. And I was like, well, that to me opens the door for invasive species. Like, invasive species is maybe the wrong word, because I think that plants move in as an opportunity and to heal what has happened. And it also, like the town's use of pesticides and insecticides and herbicides, I would love to see end. I don't think, when I think about writing a grant, I think like, well, this will save the town money. Those things are not free, and they also go into people's wells. And I mean, as a gardener, I've never needed them, and even when I built my house, I built it all natural without any of those kinds of toxic materials. So when I think of invasive species, I think the plant is trying to tell us something, and we're not listening. I don't really like the word invasive, actually. I think that's like, I don't even want to like judge it. It's just like, it's something new that has come in response to some sort of clear cutting, some sort of out of balance. And then some of the plants like knotweed by the town hall, that actually is a plant that helps with Lyme disease. And the town's response to either ripping it out or spraying it is totally wrong, and doesn't really even get rid of it. The plants come because it's there as part of a solution, or telling us about something that's going on that we need to pay attention to. And the whole thing of just going and irradiating it or getting rid of it is never a solution, because you could never get the whole thing. And I'd love to see Jenna Niger's article about that. I know I've gone to talks with Dave Jackie, and he's kind of said that thing, like this, whatever plant is there, it's telling us something. So let's see why it's there. What is in the soil that's creating the conditions for it to be there? Like, did we create a toxic environment so the plant has come to clean it up? Or, what is the reason that the plant is there?
Right. I mean, I just think of like, soil wants to be covered, and so any disturbance event that you just have this like wound on the earth, whatever is going to be the most successful at like covering that wound as quickly as possible, is what is going to take over. So
Yeah, I'd agree with all of those points. I think there's also space to talk about the effects on an ecology when local nurseries are selling ornamentals that that truly come from different ecological contexts, and then they can edge out species that they're not they're edging out native species quite aggressively, and I think that video does get into the dynamics that can give some non-native species an edge. It's not just disturbance, but it's an ability to it's like, and this is like where the limits of my vocabulary here, but certain plants' ability to start gathering energy from the sun faster than a plant that is adapted to a New England winter, for example. And eventually those plants can crowd out those native species. And
I guess I'm also, sorry, I'm curious, just as a side point, just I want to define native. Because we're kind of like moving from this presumption that like, we don't want the natives to be crowded out. And it just has always felt so arbitrary to me. To put a date on when something gets to be like naturalized to a place, and gets to belong to this kind of like static idea of balance within an ecosystem, when that's not. There are other ways of looking at the way that ecosystems are constantly moving and changing, and species are constantly moving, and there are always like drastic glaciations and big disturbance events that change things really, really drastically. So I wonder what the people that made that video that you sent, how they would define native.
Yeah, there's an inherent conservatism to hearkening back to a golden age that never was, and it's like frozen in people's minds. But it's a bit of a fiction, and it's possible to chase that static vision when it never really was in some important way. And I personally try to resist that temptation. But one of my thoughts for the work group is to do some of that outreach. So I was wondering about reaching out to that professor at UMass, or other groups. So there's this Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network, which tries to it's a mouthful, they just call it RISC. But they pair researchers with town managers to help think through some of these issues. There's also a Massachusetts Invasive Plant Advisory Group. and they, you know, they may have different, I'm sure they would have a variety of perspectives. There is a Massachusetts, this is the name of it, Massachusetts Introduced Pest Outreach Project. And I made a note, like, what is it? I don't know what it is. And then there are a bunch of laws on the books that maybe I think would be important for us to like know about. Because if we're developing if any recommendations come out of our work, our subgroup here, it'd be good to know like what the regulatory frameworks would allow us to do, or what have you. But it sounds like the recommendation could be letting things grow. I don't know, but that's something for us to talk about. But there are like people out there who've been working on some of these issues for a while, and one of my suggestions was going to be like, well, let's maybe reach out to them and see if they have time to talk to us. But and I know there's this grant window coming up. I don't know if Leslie, if you were able to click on the Westford link that I sent out, but they have a PowerPoint presentation and a plan. And as Zoe mentioned, like it involves a lot of tree planting, some attention to species that are resilient to projected climate change. So, you know, if a tree lives 50 years, that gets you to 2073. That it's like starting to get warm by then. So, but the first step of their response was to do an inventory. So it's like an information gathering kind of thing. And I wanted to see what you thought about, it might be premature, but what you thought about that sort of baseline, as like seeking a baseline from which to have a conversation about what and whether we should be doing, if you will. So.
I did look at one of the links, but I didn't see the video that Zoe mentioned. Just off the top of my head, when I think of tree planting, I think of, you know, trees that produce food, nut trees, you know, not just putting trees in because we think they're gonna be more climate resilient. But I think at this point in time, like thinking of the whole process, like what can we grow on a tree and plant more of those so that we're not using shipping to bring food in. Like there's lots of nut trees that could be planted, fruit trees that could be planted. So, you know, also as a chef, I think, well, let's think local, like what can we plant that the town can eat so that we're not bringing in from other places. And some of those trees, you know, take years to produce fruit, but that's the direction I would go in, you know, thinking more in terms of like a community garden where we have a community orchard where we're growing trees that produce food, apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, plum trees. You know, I've got some chestnut trees growing here, black walnut trees. I know hazelnuts grow well here. That's like when I think of a grant, I think let's get a grant for, you know, persimmon trees, you know, the things that we can feed our community with. And that creates like who's going to mind that orchard, you know, that could create jobs in the community. And of course, you know, to do it in a non-invasive way, like not use any herbicides, you know, do a real like organic no-till orchard. You know, you get a grant to get some experts in who are thinking about regenerative design and citing it perhaps in town land. That's just off the top of my head. That's what gets me excited.
Yeah, I like the idea also of just identifying what we're working with in terms of the bad list, you know, the big bad list of species, and you know who are we working with, and then maybe specifically education around educating ourselves and others about what potential benefits could they have? How could we potentially reframe our way of looking at specific invasives that exist in Shutesbury? And I would love to reach out to Jono and see if he might be willing to talk to our group about Jono Niger is the person who wrote this article that I was mentioning. Especially once we have like a list of an inventory of invasive species that Shutesbury that are Shutesbury specific, then he can kind of talk to those in particular. Yeah.
I like that idea, and perhaps reframing the word invasive, because as you mentioned earlier, Zoe, those are plants that you can eat or you can use for our health and well-being. So I don't really, you know, in our aggressive culture here, it's like, you know, good guys, bad guys, good plants, bad plants. I don't really think that way. It's like we have these plants and they have a purpose. Like they could be medicine, they could be food. So I don't necessarily, I don't know what invasive really means anymore, other than that it's plentiful.
Yeah, apples are not native to North America.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But we might think of them that way. If you didn't know, they're native to Kazakhstan or like Central Asia, I think.
No, right. It was Johnny Appleseed, Nate.
Right.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan, wow.
Yeah, maybe that explains why a lot of people who grow them use a lot of chemicals. But I know there are people in the valley in Ashfield and Conway who grow apples without using chemical intervention. So yeah, and our climate is changing. So what used to grow here really well may change. So I think the idea of understanding maybe even North Carolina climate, like what grows well there, and prepare, you know, those kinds of things. But the plants are definitely telling us something, and I'd love to hear Jono's take on. Jono used to live on Baker Road many, many years ago, was a neighbor of mine, and then he's in Leverett, so he's local.
I attended an event that was hosted by the library probably like 6 months ago, maybe longer, maybe closer to a year ago. But yeah, it was on identifying. I'll just, for convenience, keep using the term, but identifying non-native species. And it was interesting. It was probably like 2 or 3 hours, but we walked around where the new library will be built. And then it was less a training in looking for specific species, but looking for telltale signs that a plant had relatively recently arrived to the area. And so I thought that was interesting. I learned a few things there. And I do like the idea of trying to, I think we'll be a little bit biased towards plants and animals, but there are like aquatic issues as well that are a little harder for us to get eyeballs on, but absolutely can affect the health of the aquatic ecosystem locally. But yeah, I thought an event like the one that was held at the library last year could be part of an education outreach effort. And one of the things I was really interested as a potential approach to involving the community was there are what are called like citizen science efforts where people can they can get maybe you can provide like a map and some basic information about how to identify a handful of species, and people can then report those if you will, and then you can, through the actions of many people, gather a lot of information, and then people are also developing a skill to be observant and learn some new things as well. So that interested me as a possible angle for like community members cataloging species and learning about their environment through that kind of process. Because there are like, I don't know if we were going to see emerald ash borer or what have you, but kudzus moving north. There are species that can come along and not just like edge out something because it's a little more competitive, but truly wipe out 80% of the trees, or create a wildfire risk that's so extreme that it just makes it risky to live in a place, for humans to live in a place. So those kinds of things can come along, and even just in a self-interested way, falls under this kind of working group's interests, I think. So.
Yeah. I'm curious, like what species in Shutesbury are like considered the most dangerous and why?
So the report has this table, and it lists probably, I don't know if it's 30 or something different species. It describes what the issues are with those particular species, and then it identifies whether the species has been seen in Shutesbury historically. So I'm trying to call that up right now, but
so many of those descriptions, like I don't know, like what did they say? For autumn olive, it was like, can change the soil in this kind of like, but it like fixes nitrogen, and it my understanding is that it benefits the soil. And so, or like for the zebra mussels, like they are voracious eaters that can filter up to a liter of water a day per individual. Like they filter our waters, like they clean our waters. So it, like, there was just a lot that I was like, that just seems like you're just describing something that it does, and then I wrote, that actually sounds pretty nice.
Yeah, I agree. I always find like follow the money for the studies. You know, there was an article in, I think, the Amherst Bulletin a couple of weeks ago that UMass, this is like off on a tangent, but UMass was got a big grant to study putting solar on farmland. And I was like, that is, no. You know, you don't destroy the environment to protect it. And, you know, I was just like that. So I'm a little skeptical of UMass, like who funded, you know, I know there are some good people there, but I also know that, as Zoe says, I agree, like some of the language for some plants that are actually edible and medicinal are being, you know, evilized. And I don't really understand, you know, they've come here to help, like they're filtering the water or they're giving us food without any work. You know, even knotweed, which grows, you know, I mean, it's not my favorite food, but I have like been at wild food parties where people have made interesting things with it. But I don't know, it just feels like I'd like to see what the list of invasives are, and also to get back to some of the things that you mentioned earlier, Nate, like some of the like disease stuff that people get, like trying to make everybody afraid of. Actually, those things happen more like because there are pesticides and because there are invading chemicals in the atmosphere that creates like these mosquitoes. Or I mean, I don't know, during that whole mosquito scare, I never got bit by a mosquito that was more than just a little itchy. So I'm just questioning, like, where is the information coming and who funded it? And is it objective? And can we trust them?
That's good questions. I just haven't really found any in those descriptions in that list, anything like really convincing in terms of its threat to us as humans, in terms like wildfire or yeah. Did anyone else find anything like of note?
Is that one of the links that you sent, Nate? Has that list? I could go upstairs and be with my computer and also with you guys and look at the list. But I've been on a lot of wild food walks, and it's always interesting how much stuff is growing. It's free, it's good. You know, like the autumn olive and nettles and knotweed, and they do spread, but they spread, I think, some of them because we need that medicine. But I don't have the list in front of me. You know, I'd love to see Jono's article, and I would love to see him come and take us on a walk and or give a slide presentation. Yeah, I'd like to see Shutesbury really be a real green community.
So that list I had mentioned, it's in the hazard mitigation plan. So
Okay.
it starts around page 185, and it's about 16 pages or so.
Right.
And it's necessarily a pretty high level overview, but yeah, for the vector-borne disease, it mentions Eastern equine encephalitis and West Nile virus, and the role of the tiger mosquito that it plays in spreading it. So
yeah, I did look at that link, but it was about 16 pages, and I didn't get to that actual page there. But I know that all that stuff on the mosquito, as I understood it, was just like, we got to use more spray. We got to spray more toxic stuff to kill that mosquito, which I think accelerates climate change when we use those chemicals. And again, I know there was a lot of fear around that, and I look at a whole gestalt of like the food system. If we're going to eat GMOs, if we're going to eat food grown with all kinds of chemicals, our immune systems are not going to be very strong, and then we're falsely relying on all these sprays that degrade the environment. I mean, I signed on to not spray my property, but I don't even know if they could do that. Look at each parcel and not spray. But supposedly, there were petitions to do that, and I know that the fear is real, because they understand, like, if they create a fear, people are going to want an instant solution. And I never had an issue with that kind of mosquito, but I don't eat a standard American diet with a lot of sugar, which attracts mosquitoes. I know I'm preaching revolution. Change, bring everything back to balance. And that's what I'd love to see the town really make a major push for.
So, yeah, I think also,
go ahead. No, after you.
I was just going to say that I think when Eric gives his presentation, maybe on the 17th, I can reach out to him and ask him if there's if they have technology with his he's a part of the regenerative design group, and there might be specific ecosystems in Shutesbury that are particularly fragile and threatened by really like prolific species that are new. Just trying to use new words. And that his group might have suggestions about like targeting those areas, and kind of and they also might have technology that would help us to identify and inventory the species on that list that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So I can have him kind of include that angle in his thoughts about his presentation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So let me know if you are hearing what I'm hearing. there may be a couple areas where like applying for an MVP grant might make sense. I'm not sure where. So at our next meeting of the full ECAC meeting, they were going to ask us if like we've got an idea like ready to go. And I wonder if we're sort of at that point, or if we're wanting to do more research at this stage, outreach to people who we think have good ideas around regenerative design, or even just like some of the framing issues that we're working through. How are you thinking about sort of our report out to the larger group? I haven't done the best job with notes, but I think the main nuggets, I think I'll be able to capture them. But out of that, we'll be reporting on that. But I think one of the things they're going to be asking about is, do we want to propose a grant to do a specific thing around this topic? And what are your thoughts on that point?
Well, I'd like to see, some money for a regenerative design of the town. I know the Conway School of Landscaping, where Jono does teach, they do projects, maybe not, a whole town or a specific area. I don't know what those cost. That might be something I could start looking into. So, by the 10th, we could say we need $2,000 or we need whatever. But I think we really need to understand like what is an invasive and what is a helpful plant, and what can the town grow to enrich the environment here. What's climate resilient? Again, like I'm thinking food, because there's no store in town. So if we grow it, we don't have to drive into town, or if Zoe grows it or other people in town are growing things, or there is, I'd like to see money set aside for a real regenerative design so that we won't be dependent on fossil fuel, pesticides, insecticides, herbicides. I'd like to see a moratorium on that in town, because I don't think we need them. So the money we save from that can be put into something regenerative. Now I know that I'm being vague because I don't know what those, I see sometimes the proposals from the school, and, some of them are like under $1,000 to come and like say, look at your particular property or my particular property. There's student projects, but to hire like a real regenerative design company, what would that cost? I don't know. But I think that would be money well spent by the town to really make it more climate resilient and green, lush green. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I like the idea of putting money towards information gathering, and inventorying, and I think I'm curious about what policies are in place.
Me too.
and I don't know how to find that out.
Well, who's spraying? Not is that the highway department?
I think so. I know the highway department widened my road at one point, and I happened to be home. And Tim was like, well, you know, I could put some chemicals on here so it'll grow grass. And I was like, please don't. The green will come back. You know, it might be weeds, but I don't care if it's like grass, some kind of synthetic chemicalized grass. So they do use that routinely. And I don't know why. I mean, it's one of those things that's not necessary, but it does cost money and the town does use it. And if I hadn't been home, I wouldn't know that they had sprayed. And, you know, my well is not that far away, or other people's wells. So yeah, I think those things are causing accelerated climate change. You know, there's also in Orange, you know, Rick and Deb from Seeds of Solidarity. I mean, they could easily do a project too, as could Zoe. You know, I mean, there's so many people locally who are part of the solution without using all these dangerous chemicals, which, in my opinion, create more invasives that we don't want.
Could you expand on that? What is an invasive that we don't want?
I don't know. You know, I mean, I have to look at the list. Maybe these plants are moving in to regenerate the soil. I don't know. But I know that the word invasive, as Zoe has mentioned, may not be the right word. It's just like the soil wants to be covered. So certain, you know, like I'm sure people on a golf course think of dandelions as invasives, yet they're liver cleansers. You know, when I see a lawn that has no wild greens on it, I know that's sprayed. And that to me is not a good lawn. That's a sign of chemicals. That's a sign of cancer. So I'm looking at invasive as taking out some of the plants that are helpful, like the chemicals I'm thinking of as invasives.
Who might we email to ask about policies? Like, could we email the highway department or town hall? Or I get maybe just our website would have.
The highway department could be a good place to start. You know, maybe it's an email that goes to Becky, maybe it goes to the highway department. Maybe it goes to the open space committee. Like, what keeps those spaces open? Are they using anything? I
wonder if Miriam would know. I feel like Miriam would know.
Miriam might know. Or have an idea about how to find that.
She might know. You know, Don also probably knows. I could talk to him. I mean, there are chemicals, toxic chemicals being used in town. And, you know, I could check in with Don. Do you want to check in with Miriam? Or, I don't know.
Yeah, I can email Miriam.
Okay, I'll check in with Don.
Is that something that I can just email her directly about?
Yes.
I think as a one-on-one you can.
Oh, totally. Yeah. From an open meeting.
Yeah.
Because you're a delegate of the work group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not yeah. Okay, so I'm capturing that.
Thank you for taking notes, Nate.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I will refine these and send them out. But yeah, I guess so. On this information gathering tact, Westford, they got a grant to engage a group of people to develop a GIS map of their canopy and where these different species were, and develop that inventory of species, which then informs like meetings and conversations and community outreach and variety of things that's all like 2 steps before any action, like in the implementation. Is that something we would want to suggest or propose as a thing that is on the table for ECAG to consider?
Yes, I think so.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is. You know, I'm looking for money for like a regenerative design consult. Did they do that, or they just kind of?
Well, like regenerating what, right? I think is like part of the nugget there. So, in order to propose regenerative design as a solution to what is present, like what is present in Shutesbury, it's the step where you catalog what's going on ecologically in the town, where then you would say like, oh, around Lake Wyola there's some species, and it's I don't even know, but it's use your imagination. It's causing some kind of problem, and regenerative design is then something that we could implement as a remediation strategy in that particular area, right? So I think the idea would be, what are the 5 places in town where regenerative design would help us restore some balance, if you will, right? Because we've got, I don't know what the square mileage is of Shutesbury, but it's hard to propose doing something everywhere, I think, is one of the thoughts.
Well, there may be places in town where they routinely spray, so that might be like a good thing to know. Where do they routinely spray, if they routinely spray, or what do they look for when they get out the chemicals, and where in town are they doing it? Are they doing it along all the dirt roads? Are they doing it by the lake? You know, to find out from Miriam, or, you know, I'll check in with Don, like, where are they using the chemicals? For instance, like on the solar arrays, they've used chemicals to make sure plants don't grow. And where else? You know, if we can stop them from using those chemicals, then maybe they can't use them on any clear cutting and solar arrays. That's like a long-term wish dream, but you know, I think just finding out where they're using them, what they're using, how often, and yeah, why? You know, because some people routinely just look at a bottle and say, well, I need to put this on 4 times a year. They never really look at the plant. Is the plant doing well? Does it need it? you know, I don't know if Tim at the highway department would answer that question. I could give him a call and ask. I know he's not that thorough. I've had him come and look at stuff on my road, and he like looks at like the point, and 30 feet away there was another point to look at. It's like, why didn't he just turn around and look? But I'll I could ask him what he's using and when he's using it, you know, and he could say, you know, I can't say, or ask Becky, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, I'll ask him, and I'll ask Don for, as the tree warden, he may know what the town is using as well. So I'll check in with Tim, I'll check in with Don, and if I get nowhere, I'll let you guys know, but I'll follow that thread. Yeah, and see who's authorizing it in town.
We're at 1 hour.
Yeah.
I will I'll tighten up these minutes and just circulate it among us.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we've got minutes that seem tight enough, I guess we can share those out, and that can be part of our report out to the larger group.
Right.
All right. Are there other topics that we should tackle before we adjourn?
Well, I have a question. I know that I guess January 10th was sort of when that select board meeting is that right?
Isn't there one tomorrow night?
No, there's one tomorrow night. And then then January 10th is when I'm teaching on Zoom, and that's when we're meeting as a group. So that maybe it's this, there's another meeting where maybe it's on the 7th, the 20th or something, where we're making recommendations to the select board. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, okay. Yeah.
All right. Can I move to adjourn our meeting?
Second.
Yeah.
All right. Meeting adjourned at 8:33. I'm really glad that we were able to eke this out, because my week's going to be pretty full. So I'm really glad that we could have this conversation this evening. Thanks, thanks to both of you.
Me too. Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, this I'm really glad that we're having smaller meetings. I think sometimes in the bigger meeting, it's hard to focus as well as we did tonight.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Good night.